Hey, this is Mark Lichtenwalter again, up here just south, barely south of Butte, Montana. Headed back to Price, Utah on the 10th day of October 2025. Last night I had a request to hear my story, so I thought I would attempt again to make a video talking about my story. So, this is part one, my early history, my childhood and teen years. So I was born in June of 1977 in Layton, Utah. I was born to Mark Trent and to Carla Lichtenwalter, who were married 2 years before I was born. They had a child who was stillborn at 17 weeks. So my mom believes that I was the spirit of that child and I came back. I don't know one way or the other if that's true or not. So I was born later in 1977. My mom was raised by Calvin and Lichtenwalter and Leona Felton. Um, and their story is that my grandmother, when she was 17, along with her family members in Wisconsin, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. My grandfather did not join until he was 35. My grandfather lived in Chicago in the slums. My great grandfather was an alcoholic. When World War II broke out, my grandfather joined the Marines. And when he was at Bougainville and then Guadalcanal, and I can't remember the third place right now. Anyway, he was caught, or he was shot up on the beach. Medic was taking care of him. His platoon was able to get past the beach and into the mountainous region of the island that they were on, and they got pinned down in a turkey shoot. My grandfather heard about this and made his way alone um, to flank the enemy somehow on the mountain. His platoon was down in the canyon. He was able to take out the first two enemy combatants, and then the other machine gun nest shot him up again, and they only stopped shooting at him after he stopped cussing at them. So he played dead finally. And I'm getting this from the newspaper articles that I have about it. Anyway, after he played dead for a little bit, they started shooting at his buddies again, and he was able to pull himself closer because his legs had been taken out. Um, and he had one grenade and a knife left. He was able to get the grenade close enough to stun the two enemy combatants, and then he went in there and dispatched them, saving his platoon. But in the price, he died. He said that he went to a place and there was a man there, and the man told him that his life was not over, that he had a mission to fulfill still. And so he went back, and when he finally woke up on the medical ship, he learned that part of one leg had been amputated on the beach to save his life, and the other one was amputated on the medical ship. So he lost both of his legs below the knee as a result of taking care of his buddies. Anyway, they had to chase gangrene for a while, which actually caused him to have hair loss at the tender young age of 20, I think. Anyway, my grandmother had joined the Navy and had become a nurse in the Navy Corps, or I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so she was stationed at Angel Island, and that's how they met. He actually had a polka dotted nightgown or hospital gown that somehow he had gotten when all the other ones were not designed like that. Anyway, but he was a character, and after he had been in a wheelchair for a while, he made the attempt and was successful at becoming a person that could walk on wooden legs. Anyway, he went around the West Coast and did speeches on the war effort. And then after the war, he went back to Angel Island in San Francisco Bay and found my grandmother and told him that he wanted her to be his wife and that he was headed for a train to Sacramento and back to Illinois the next morning. And if she would accept his proposal, that she should meet him the next morning at the hotel and join him. And she did. So that's how they got together. And then they went up to Sacramento and got married there in I think 1945. They were both born in 1923. My grandmother was about 6 months older than he was. Anyway, he died when he was 82 years old in 2005, and she passed away in 2019. I think she was almost 97 years old. If she would have just lived a little over a month, she would have been 97 years old. So, anyway, and she never remarried after he died. So, when my grandfather was 35, he quit drinking. I guess he was a big whiskey drinker, and he joined the church. And because they both had pensions, with him being a double leg amputee and her being a Navy nurse, they didn't need to work, but they did. My grandfather founded several companies, did developments, mined uranium, mined gold, and um, when they were living in Tonopah, Nevada, they actually were allowed, they were given special dispensation from the president of the church at that time when my mother, who was the youngest of three girls, by the way, she was about 6, so she was born in 57. So I guess that would have been 63. They were given special dispensation to go on missions with their family since they didn't have to work. So my grandparents were set apart as missionaries, and my mom and my aunts went on missions with them. So my grandparents served 7 missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My mom and my dad were also LDS. My grandparents on my dad's side were military. I only met my dad's dad one time, I think, when I was 12. And I didn't know much about him, although I found out later in his obituary that he was a commander of base in somewhere near Cheyenne as a missile base, and also he was at NORAD. He was a fighter pilot in Korea, I believe. I think he flew the F-4 Phantom, and he may have been involved in Vietnam as well. My my dad's mom was in the Air Force, and I don't know what she did. Um, they divorced when my dad's dad got caught cheating on my dad's mom, and later on she married one of their friends, Keith Ricker. his wife died of cancer, and he eventually married, and he was the one that I knew as my grandpa. He was awesome. I I miss him. He actually died. He was joking around in the nursing home, and I don't remember how old he was. He was born in 1919, I think, but I can't remember. Anyway, he was joking around with the nurse at the nursing home, and she turned around to do something and turned back around, and he had passed away, and they had been just joking. So he had a good death. Anyway, my grandmother died exactly to the day 2 years later, and yeah, so all right. My mom and dad were members of the LDS Church, but they were kind of rebellious. My mom actually talked about a statue that she had that she used to hide pot in. Now, she later on said that, oh, I never did drugs, but she did. Anyway, my dad did drugs too. In fact, my dad, after I was born, or maybe even before, I'm not sure, became a very heavy addict of different kinds of drugs. And when my little sister was born, he was actually in a treatment center slash mental institution at the University of Utah, and they actually allowed him to go to a different floor where my mom gave birth to my sister. Anyway, they divorced when I was 3 years old because of all the drugs and the poverty and the abuse, I guess. And then I didn't have hardly any contact with my dad at all until I think I was 10 years old, and we were about ready to go to Okinawa, Japan. My mom had remarried an Air Force guy, and we were going to go to be stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan. And so my I met my dad, and that was the first time I remember meeting him. He was supposed to do child support, but he every time they would find him, he would quit his job and move with his new family. He had three other daughters who I've not spoken to in many years. I've not spoken to him since 2006, and I have not spoken to them since about the same time. I don't have anything to do with that side of the family. My father also had, I think, three more illegitimate children. I don't even know what their names are, how old they are, or anything about them. The only reason we know about them is because um, when he was finally caught and had to pay child support, they had to split it up between his six children. So I guess he had nine children altogether. Uh, three with my mom, three with his wife Mary, and three others back east somewhere. I don't know anything about them, but they had to split. Use the fact that he had these nine children, six of them not living with him, to determine the child support. Um, so anyway, my stepdad, my second dad, he was very abusive. His father was also in the Marines and a drill instructor by the name of Dean Kipp. And I guess he was very abusive to my stepdad, who was the oldest. And my stepdad was very abusive to me. So I was raised as though I was a soldier, and yeah, I was a mess. Anyway, just I don't want to get into it too much, but that finally ended when I was 12 when he stabbed me in the left arm with a steak knife because I was not holding my fork right when we were having steak dinner, and I always had to sit next to him. I was terrified of the man. Anyway, so my mom finally sent him away. Um, so getting back into the history of my grandparents, um, my mom abandoned me with some strangers, and when I was 2 years old, my grandparents went and found me, and then they started raising me. Um, and their home was in Spencer, Idaho. That's the only place that I consider being a legitimate home when I was growing up. When I was on my mission in 1997, I wrote down all of the places that I had lived and all the times I had moved up to that point. And I was 20 when well, I was 19, but I was just about to turn 20 when I flew out to Macon, Georgia, well, to Atlanta, Georgia, and then I served in the Georgia Macon mission. So when I got out there, it was 9 days before my birthday, and I was 20 years old when I could remember all of the places that I had lived. And anyway, I wrote that in my journal. I think between my different sets of grandparents, eventually my dad did take me twice when I was in my teens, and then my mom, and then um, other places. For instance, I was at Primary Children's Hospital Psychiatric Unit, West Wing, when I was 14 for evaluation on, um, well, basically what had happened to me with my stepdad. But then there was also other things that had to do with my mom and abuse that she enacted upon me, um, which I don't want to get into here. But yeah, it was messed up. So I was also in Moida Juvenile Detention Center for a little while. I was also when that was I was 14. I lived with my aunt and uncle. Um, Sometimes I lived with. Um, Let me think. Well, I was in a drug and alcohol rehab center and a youth home, uh, but I that was when I was 14 as well. I didn't use drugs and alcohol, although at the tender young age of 12 years old, I did start smoking cigarettes. Um, anyway, but it was just a place where my mom could get rid of me, and I suffered some abuse in that place as well by the older teenagers who were there. Anyway, I eventually broke out of that place. That's a story in and of itself. Anyway, uh, when I was 16 years old, my aunt and uncle, who had taken care of me several times. Oh, real quick, I had lived in 68 different places by the time I was 20. That's what I was getting to with the journal entries. I wrote them all down and the approximate times that I lived there. And then by the time I was 20, I'd moved over 100 times. But I think that included the 4 different areas that I served in my mission. So, anyway, my grandparents took me almost every single summer, except for the summer that I spent in Okinawa, Japan, and the summers before I was 2 years old, and then several winters also um, in Spencer and also in Nilsen, Nevada, near Lake Mead. In fact, I was down there when the Henderson plant blew up back in the 80s. Anyway, yeah, some kind of interesting history that I have there, right? From a very young age, there was always spiritual things happening around me, demonic type things. My mom said that they happened even when I was like 1 and 2 years old. But the first time I remember anything happening, we were living in North Salt Lake. Um, just actually, you can see the house that I live in just off I-15, and there's like a frontage road, and right before the frontage road goes under I-15, we lived right there. So anyway, the my bedroom was on the east side of the room, and I remember it was a Saturday, and I was waking up to go watch cartoons. I was 6 years old, maybe 5 or 6, because it was well, my my stepdad and my mom got married when I was 6. and then I think they got married because he got her pregnant. Anyway, because my brother's 6 years younger than me, and they married when I was six. So anyway, so let's see here. Oh, so I didn't have any curtains on my windows, but my bedroom was on the south. I mean, on the yeah, the southeast side of the house, and I remember no, it was the south. I have to think about that one. Anyway, I could see the stove from the kitchen if my door was open, and my mom used to leave the stove light on, which was kind of like a nightlight for me. But anyway, so I woke up, the sun's flooding into the room, and there was a dark figure that I could not see through standing in my doorway, which terrified me to death. And this is in the daytime, by the way. It looked like a man that the silhouette or shadow of a man wearing something sort of like a top hat and a cape. I didn't know what to call him, but that was the 80s, and Star Wars was a big thing, and so I called him Darth Vader. That same individual, um, the demonic type individual, um, hold on here. Anyway, he was always around me, um, like wherever I went. And part of the reason I think that, okay, sorry. Part of the reason why I moved so much was because of the abuse. Weak-minded people um, have always abused me, whether they were strangers or whether I knew them, because Satan can manipulate these kind of people. So I moved a lot because of the abuse, but also because of the spiritual paranormal stuff that always seemed to happen around me. The only place that was really safe for me was my maternal grandparents' home. It seemed to be blessed. I never had any problems there. But even when I lived with my paternal grandparents, which I did several times, um, like that individual who is Satan himself, um, was always part of living there as well. Just terrifying me, terrifying my family. A lot of people in my family, including whoever I lived with, always had those things happening when I lived with them. So, in fact, right before my aunt and uncle pulled me out of 10th grade and we were living in Soda Springs, Idaho, my cousin Jeff, who's several years younger than me, went into my room because their dog was barking at our door. They had this little black Pomeranian, and he went into the room, and the man was standing in the room, and we were all sitting out in the living room, and there's a hallway in between my room at the end of the hallway and the living room, and he came back and he was shaking and he was like pale white, and he was too scared to talk for quite a while, but he eventually told us what he saw. My aunt and uncle decided to pull me out of school, and they got a single wide trailer in Kaysville, Utah, and made me get a job when I was 16. And then that was in May of 94. In June of 94, shortly before my 16th birthday, um, my grandparents actually bought me a motorcycle for my birthday, and my aunt. So my aunt never had a job, but my uncle did. So he stayed up in Soda Springs, and she actually pulled a couple of her kids out of school, and we all got jobs. But then I was at work one day at the burger stop in Layton, Utah, right on Gentile by Layton High. She comes into work, and I was doing burgers and sandwiches back then. at that place and fry cook and whatever. And she told me that she was going to visit her husband and she was going to take her kids. And here's the keys to the single wide trailer home. And then so after work, I ride my motorcycle home and all their stuff is gone, and there's a note on the counter that says you are old enough to take care of yourself and you're not my responsibility. I called my mom. She says her new boyfriend doesn't like me, even though he had never met me to that point. Eventually, they got married. His name is Greg Van Wagenen. Anyway, so yeah, it was just a mess. Anyway, so I ended up living in that place as 16, 17 for just a little while, and then eventually I became homeless after that, living in the rafters of my friend's garage, and his mom used to let me come in the house to take a shower, and I would use my motorcycle to go to work. My grandparents found out what was happening, and they eventually found me again and took me up to Spencer, Idaho, and I got a job working for Larson's Farms, driving a 6x6 1945 deuce and a half with a potato bin on the back during harvest season. So this is like September, October of 1994, working midnight to 4 p.m., 6 days a week. And then I got on a list to go to Job Corps in Clearfield, Utah, and my trade of uh, preference was diesel mechanics. I got my GED there with honors, whatever that means. I think my overall test scores were 97%, um, and it only took me 2 days to take my GED. I took practice tests the one day, and then I took the GED on the next day, got my GED. And by the way, when I was in the psychiatric center for evaluation at Primary Children's Hospital, part of that was an evaluation of IQ, and my IQ at that time was 147. It is a little higher than that now. 14-year-old having a 147 IQ is like kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's high anyway, but as a 14-year-old. So anyway, I always got bad grades in school, but I always aced all the tests. And mostly the reason I got bad grades is because I just didn't care. The first time I ever told my mom that I wanted to kill myself and I wanted to die was when we lived in Okinawa. Um, she said it was when I was 9. That doesn't make sense because we went there when I was 10. So I don't know. Anyway, she said I was 9 when that happened. I actually suffered suicidal ideation up until I was about 35 years old and have tried to commit suicide several times in my life. Um, I've got all kinds of scars. And I was very intent. I wasn't crying out. It was, I want to die. I've hung myself 3 times. I've done a lot of things to die, and I could never die. I've been blown up. That was an accident. Everybody thought I was dead, but I wasn't. And then that same day, because we started the fire that caused the explosion in this junkyard in Farmington, Utah, we ran up around. There's like a little reservoir with these old dams, Pioneer era dams, and there's like this rock thing that there's like a higher portion of the reservoir and a lower portion, at least back then. I haven't been there in years. Anyway, and it was in the winter, and as we were like jumping across these boulders to get away from this explosion that we caused, I slipped on the ice and fell down into the frozen lake below with the little waterfall that was there and went into the ice. And I don't know who saved me, but they threw me in a bathtub full of hot water when somebody actually did save me. I didn't know how to swim. Anyway, yeah, all kinds of. I could like this. My story can go on for hours and not even get to the spiritual parts that have to do with the Father and the Son. But anyway, so let's see here. All right, so that's the overview of my early life when I was in Job Corps in 1995. So I was in Job Corps from October of 1994 until March of 1996 when I completed my diesel mechanics degree. And also in August of 95, I got my CDL, Class A CDL, so I was 18, just barely 18, a couple months. Anyway, and then I graduated in 96. I became homeless again. I did have a job driving produce truck out of Bountiful, Utah, delivering to like all the way down to Nephi or all the way up to Cache Valley, Utah. Mostly Reams, Smiths, and Albertsons. Anyway, I ended up homeless. I bought a car, or actually, my grandparents bought the car with the money that I earned from being in Job Corps, and so it was like a pretty nice car for me. I mean, it was great. Anyway, ended up living in that in Davis County, and then going out to San Francisco, and because that's where I was conceived, according to my mother. Anyway, and ended up homeless around there and around Stockton, and then came back to Utah. I was homeless around there, and then I was very suicidal at the time. Also, real quick, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but so in I never really liked the LDS Church. Um, I didn't like the people, and it was mostly because my mom used to get up and fast and testimony meetings and talk trash about me in order to gain sympathy from the members because I was very angry because of all the stuff that I had been through. You know, as a teenager, I was very angry. I was probably more angry than normal, just because of the neglect and the physical and mental and also sexual abuse that had happened to me as a kid that my mom allowed and that my mom committed. And I don't know what that's all about. There's large portions of my childhood that I do not remember. I do remember some of the sexual abuse, and I remember that she committed it. So there were also other sexually things that happened to me because of teenagers, and specifically one specific teenager that was older, way older than me, who was a girl. So I never remember any male abusers, but I like there's a lot of things in that aspect that I don't remember a lot of. I just remember certain things, and I've always remembered them. I've always remembered them. So anyway, but the abuse, the physical abuse, got very violent, and I do remember some of that, but I don't remember all of that. I was terrified as a child whenever I lived with my mom and my stepdad. Anyway, I eventually in '94 got saved. In fact, that was November 25th, 1994. And I was right around Thanksgiving, if not Thanksgiving itself. I remember I was on Job Corps and I had this friend who was a Southern Baptist, and I used to go to church with him, and I considered myself a Southern Baptist. Anyway, so after, and that was in 1994. In '96, I had gone pretty goth and very suicidal, and then I was homeless, and I wanted to die, but I was scared to death go to hell because I didn't want to kill myself. Well, I wanted to kill myself. I was scared if I did kill myself, that I would go straight to hell. So I used drugs and alcohol to alleviate my mental anguish and became a pretty hardcore drug addict and alcoholic. Uh, in '96, I was about to be homeless again because I was staying with friends, but like I hurt my back at this job that I had at the Red Lobster which is still there in Layton, Utah, and like I could barely walk and I couldn't work, so they fired me. And I hurt my back at work, but I didn't know about workers' compensation back then. Anyway, it was such a mess. My whole life was such a mess. I don't know how I survived it, but I did. So anyway, I decided I was going to be well, I was going to be homeless again, coming up into October, November of '96, and I made a very large attempt at suicide. And I'm going to leave it there for this part, um, because what happens next is my conversion, and I want that to be a separate video. So I was a drug addict. I did try to kill myself. My friend found me. They saved my life. After I got out of the hospital, I wrote God a letter, and I met the missionaries shortly after that. And then I had a conversion experience I cannot, I can't deny the reality that Joseph Smith is a prophet of God. I cannot, because of that. No matter whatever happened afterwards, no matter what I've learned, no matter what God has shown me, no matter what, I know Joseph Smith was a prophet, and I'll leave it at that. So this is part one of my history, or my early history, leading up and the foundation of my life as a child and where I come from and who I am in part. And we'll leave it at that. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, comment, ask me questions. Please, I always leave my comments open if you want to know anything about anything. I can either text response to the comments in this video, or I will make another video explaining more in detail if there's any questions. Um, Thank you for watching, everyone. And by the way, um, after my mission in the late '90s, I've been a truck driver pretty much ever since. So, love driving truck. In fact, I am in, I think this is Dillon. Maybe I passed Dillon already. I'm about an hour away from where I grew up in Spencer, Idaho. I'll be driving through there today. So headed back to Price, Utah. And by the way, um, I live in Emery County, Utah, if you're interested. And I drive mostly the mountain states. So sometimes go to Portland, sometimes go down to south of Phoenix. Spent a lot of time in Idaho and Montana and Utah. So, all right, take care, everyone. God bless. Oh, and by the way, I am married. I've been married for 13 years, and we have 5 kids. Bye.